Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar, HS2 Destination Net Zero. I'm Hannah Leggett, a Senior Environment Manager here at HS2, and today I am proud to be your host. We're really proud to be supporting Net Zero Week, which is the UK's National Awareness Week, because it provides a dedicated platform to voice opinions, share advice and information to really help us make changes to transition to a net zero carbon future. The carbon emissions challenge that we face has never been clearer. The UK's pledge to bring greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050 is rightly considered amongst the most pressing social and economic issue. However, as it currently stands, the transport sector is the largest single emitter of greenhouse gases. So this places a huge responsibility on those of us who work in this industry to really look at the ways we can innovate, challenge and ultimately set new standards for ourselves. For the UK to tackle climate change while supporting a growing economy and population, we really need to look at more carbon zero forms of mass transport. Britain's new zero carbon high-speed railway, High-Speed 2, is going to help to deliver exactly that. And it's going to do so from its first day of operation, with every single train powered by carbon-free electricity. But before I give too much away of what's to come, let's move on quickly to run through some housekeeping and a bit more on what we've got in store for you this afternoon. So we don't anticipate any technical issues during our event, but everybody knows how IT can be. So if you do experience any connection issues, for instance, if your feed freezes, we recommend that you wait about 10 seconds and then it will most likely correct itself. However, if that doesn't happen, just use the leave button to exit the event and then rejoin using the event link, and that should hopefully sort it out. The slide in front of you just shows some of the features of Microsoft Teams in case you're not familiar with it. So along the bottom there, you've got the play and pause, the volume and the full screen controls. All microphones on attendees are muted, but you can still participate through the event by submitting your questions via the question panels on the right hand side of your screen. If at any point during the conversation you do want to ask a question, you can click the ask a question button, type in your question and then just hit send, and this will come straight through to me. And throughout, I'll be keeping an eye on the questions that do come through, and then at the end of the session we'll try to answer as many of them as we can. Finally, we're asking for your feedback. Feedback on today's event is greatly appreciated. So after the session's concluded, we will be sending around a short feedback form, and it only takes a couple of minutes to fill in. And we really want to hear from you and learn about what you think. And it's really important in helping us improve and develop our engagement for future events. So please do that if you get a chance. I also did want to outline that we have a really friendly, informative event for you today. And we really want to get those questions coming in and have a really good discussion. But we do ask that in all our interactions, everyone is respectful towards our staff. If you do have specific issues where perhaps works are affecting you and you need a direct conversation, please do get in touch with us via our help desk, which is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And the details are on the screen in front of you now. And we'll be absolutely happy to help wherever we can. And if you want to find a bit more about our statement on conducting respectful conversations, the statement is also available on our website. So moving on now to what we have in store for you today, and we have an action-packed agenda. We're going to kick off with our resident carbon expert, Mark Fenton, who's going to explain to you why we need HS2 to reach net zero, and also how we're pioneering a cleaner, greener way to build and run high-speed railways. Then we'll move on to our in-house air quality specialist, Andrea Davidson, and she's going to go through some of the exciting innovative challenges we're using to build the railway that's also helping to reduce our carbon footprint, improve air quality, but also really help the wider construction industry become cleaner. And then after that, you'll hear from me on how we're creating a green corridor. And this is going to go alongside the HS2 route to integrate the railway into the landscape, which is going to create a network of bigger, better connected habitats and new green spaces for wildlife and people to enjoy. And finally, at the end, we'll move on and have around 10 to 15 minutes to answer your questions to our panel. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Mark to tell you more.
Thanks, Hannah, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'd like to start just with an introduction to HS2. It's Britain's new zero carbon high-speed railway, and it's been built now. HS2 trains, they'll link the biggest cities in Scotland with Manchester, Birmingham and London. And HS2 will integrate with new lines and upgrades across Britain's rail system to deliver faster travel to many towns and cities across Britain, not directly on the HS2 route, including Liverpool, Sheffield, Leeds, Nottingham and Derby. We have 170 miles of new high-speed line already under construction between Crewe and London, and in total the government is planning over 260 miles of new high-speed line across the country. HS2 has been built to the highest standards, using world-class engineering to protect the countryside, protect local communities and cut carbon emissions. HS2 is a huge undertaking. It's Britain's first new intercity railway north of London in 100 years, and it's Europe's largest construction project. If we were to achieve the same level of economic and environmental benefit seen from high-speed rail in mainland Europe and Asia, Britain needs a nationwide high-speed rail network. And HS2 will be exactly this, Britain's high-speed rail network, helping to address the three key problems facing the nation. And these being capacity, carbon and connectivity. So in terms of capacity, UK rail demand has more than doubled in the last 20 years and is forecast to keep growing, with passenger pressure, significant pressure on key north-south routes. Further upgrades to current lines would cause significant disruption for passengers and line-side communities and would deliver a fraction of the capacity as a new railway line. So building HS2 unlocks a massive amount of space on the existing railway by placing high-speed passenger services on their own pair of tracks. HS2 adds hundreds of thousands of seats onto the network each day, and by taking long-distance services off the existing rail network, it frees up space for more freight services, as well as local and regional passenger trains. It's also about connectivity. So HS2 has the potential to change the economic geography of the country and be a catalyst for growth. And it does that by bringing Britain closer together. There can be more investment in the Midlands and the North and open up leisure and job opportunities for millions of people. And importantly, it's also about carbon. So transport is the UK's largest emitter of carbon. And for the UK to tackle climate change while supporting a growing economy and population, it needs more zero carbon forms of transport, which HS2 will deliver from 2029. We'll offer zero carbon travel as a clean alternative to long distance car journeys and flights, and that'll help the UK to tackle climate change and improve air quality. So carbon reduction isn't a new requirement for HS2, it's fundamental to our purpose. HS2 will be a critical part of a net zero carbon transport system. It will deliver zero carbon journeys to hundreds of thousands of people every day, and it will contribute to the decarbonisation of the wider transport sector through modal shift of passenger and freight journeys from road and air to rail. But the benefits of HS2, they're not just delivered through what we build, but also through how we build. And that's why the programme's strategic goals and objectives are important, because we are building more than just a railway. So as you can see in the bottom right, carbon reduction is one of our strategic objectives. All of our suppliers are and will continue to be signed up to helping us deliver on these goals, and we'll hold them to account for what they deliver and the way that they behave. So to reduce the carbon footprint, we need to first understand what it looks like so that we can identify our carbon hotspots. So those being the areas with the greatest impact and potential for carbon reduction. And this is what the carbon footprint of phase 1 of HS2 would look like if we were to simply adopt current UK industry practice. This is measured over the whole life of our assets. So that includes the construction periods and 120 years of operation. And this is a whole life carbon footprint. It'd be approximately 14.5 million tonnes of carbon dioxide emissions. You can see that about half of the carbon footprint is associated with the extraction, processing and manufacture of raw materials and construction products. And then about 25% of the carbon footprint is associated with the transport of those materials and products to site and the subsequent construction and installation processes. So about 75% of the carbon footprint is associated with the construction phase. And then the remainder is associated with the next 120 years, the maintenance and replacement, and all of the energy that's consumed to operate our trains, stations, depots and infrastructure. So HS2, we recognise that we have a unique opportunity to play a significant role in advancing and accelerating decarbonisation across construction and manufacturing. And that's why we're implementing carbon management best practice across delivery. So the slide here summarises the key components of our carbon management system, and this has been accredited by Lloyd's Register Quality Assurance to the industry best practice standard for carbon management, which is called PAS 2080. We were actually the first transport client to achieve the accreditation, and the accreditation recognises that we have the right processes and capabilities in place, and that we're able to effectively manage carbon emissions to ultimately achieve carbon reduction. We've also instructed and mandated this to our main work contractors, so they're required to implement the same carbon management best practice. And that means that HS2 and our supply chain are working within a common carbon management framework, that we have compatible and complementary processes in place that support effective and efficient delivery of our carbon reduction objectives. But we're well aware that reducing carbon is as much about changing behaviours as it is about changing processes. So we know that we need to raise awareness, build capability and motivate action to deliver lower carbon solutions. And as part of building capability, we've developed a programme of carbon literacy training, which seeks to provide colleagues with the motivation and capability to take action to reduce carbon emissions. So we've rolled that learning out amongst our board and executive leadership team, and we've achieved Carbon Literate Organisation Bronze accreditation. In terms of the tangible carbon reduction examples, we have Align joint venture who are delivering Colne Valley Viaduct. They're on track to cut the amount of embedded carbon by 28% within that structure, and that equates to over 63,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide emissions. They've done this by working really closely with our rail systems experts, and through that they've been able to narrow the structure by over a metre. That's enabled a significant reduction in the amount of concrete and steel that's needed and the associated carbon emissions. They've also significantly reduced the amount of earthworks that are required for the approach embankment, and that's reducing carbon emissions from the transport of materials to site, helps to reduce disruption for local residents by reducing the number of HGVs on local roads. Tame Valley Viaduct, that's another great example that's been delivered by EKFB, and it's a really good example of how contractors are using the latest engineering techniques to reduce carbon emissions from construction. So here the design team have simplified the structure of the viaduct so that every major component can be made off-site before being assembled on-site. So it's effectively slotted together like a giant Lego set. And that's cutting the carbon footprint by an estimated 33%. So again, as well as cutting embedded carbon in terms of the materials, the approach requires less lorries to deliver material to site, cuts waste, and it will reduce disruption for the community during construction. And then we also have Curzon Street Station, so the new station in Birmingham city centre. That's set to achieve a 55% reduction in whole life carbon emissions. So construction products, operational energy consumption, they account for about 80% of the carbon footprint of Curzon Street. So those are the areas that we need to focus our attention. So the station is designed to achieve zero carbon emissions from energy that's consumed to operate building integrated systems like heating, cooling and lighting. That's been achieved by reducing energy demand and consumption in the first instance. So for example, using LED lighting, and then generating low carbon energy through almost 3,000 metres squared of solar panels on the platform canopies and other sources of energy like ground source heat pumps. We're also using prefabricated timber soffit units. They're 27 times more carbon efficient than steel comparators. They'll be installed in the main station roof. The paving in the public realm has been reduced in depth by 38%, so that reduces embodied carbon. And we're also using 100% recycled content steel roof sections. They'll be bolted together rather than welded as well to aid future reuse and maintenance. So our work to cut carbon emissions is well underway. We have the right processes, systems and tools in place. They've been independently verified as being in accordance with the best practice. We're a carbon literate organisation. We provide our colleagues with the knowledge, motivation and ability to take carbon reduction action. And since 2016, we've been working to halve the carbon footprint of phase 1. So we're already delivering substantial carbon reduction. We're making good progress against that target with a 25% reduction forecast at the end of March 2022. But we want and we need to go further, and that's why at the start of this year we launched our net zero carbon plan. So the plan explains the work that we've undertaken to date, what we're doing now, but importantly, it maps the progress that we'll make in the years ahead on our journey to achieving net zero carbon emissions in 2035. So the plan includes a few headline targets, namely to become a net zero carbon business by 2025, to deliver zero carbon travel from day one of operation, and to achieve net zero carbon construction and operation from 2035. And what we mean by that is that we'll reduce emissions as far as possible, and from 2035 we'll offset the residual carbon emissions that we can't eliminate as we build, maintain and operate HS2. So we plan to work towards net zero by, for example, eliminating diesel on all our construction sites by 2029, specifying and purchasing concrete and steel with half the production carbon emissions of 2021 levels by 2030, and using 100% zero carbon energy to power our trains, stations, depots and infrastructure. And a key part of the plan is also looking at ways we'll influence the wider construction and manufacturing industries to create a cleaner, greener future. So to support those targets, we've identified 10 key action areas that will be critical in delivering our ambition. So the action areas are really diverse in nature, but for example, they include building a consistent net zero carbon culture, raising awareness, motivating action and building capability to drive carbon reduction performance, communicating our net zero carbon objectives to stakeholders and being clear about how we'll work together. There's opportunities to use digital engineering tools and processes to transform and improve project delivery to reduce carbon emissions. We'll need to invest in innovation and form partnerships to speed up ways to cut emissions in our supply chain. We'll need to work with industry groups and peers, supply chain partners, key stakeholders to make sure that our efforts are aligned, that they're effective and that they inspire action. And we're also committed to sharing best practice and lessons learned with the wider construction sector. We'll need to use our influence to encourage others to take action to tackle climate change. So there is a lot to do to get to net zero, but our work to cut carbon emissions is well underway. And to show you what that looks like down on our sites, I'm going to pass you over to Andrea.
Great, thanks, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us this afternoon. As Hannah sort of mentioned earlier, what I'm going to run through and what Mark mentioned now as well is really just highlight out some of the examples around how we are constructing using some of the cleaner and greener technologies in terms of meeting those key ambitions that Mark has just set out. As sort of Mark mentioned, one of the key areas is innovation, and a key action area that we're looking at. There isn't a construction site that's the same, and whether that's sort of the size of it, type of activity they're doing, or location, proximity to sort of sensitive environments and communities. And what that really means is the common phrase we often use is there is no simple one-size-fits-all silver bullet when it comes to cleaning up construction, which is why it's so important that through our extensive innovation program on HS2, we develop and trial a range of different technologies and solutions that really accelerate cutting emissions that can then be tailored to sites and their specific needs. And what we do on the ground is really collaborate with our contractors, our wider supply chain, a range of innovators and academia to really ensure that we use the best available techniques and technologies that are out there, that we try different technologies on our sites to really demonstrate what opportunities there are. And what we aim to do then is, with the size and scale that Mark went through earlier, is roll those out across our projects that we can share findings with wider industry and adopt them across the program. And one key area that we've really been focused on and developing evidence around is diesel alternatives. And that's really in line with that ambition that Mark just mentioned in our Zero Carbon Action Plan around net zero construction by 2035, with having diesel-free construction sites by 2029. And we're really excited. We were able to announce our first diesel-free construction site just in May earlier this year. And that was achieved at the Canterbury Road ventilation shaft in South Kilburn in London by our joint venture SCS, so Skanska, Costain and Strabag. And the team on the ground has been absolutely integral in making this happen and really finding alternatives and solutions that could be adopted. And what the ventilation shaft is it will link the Euston tunnels, and it will be there to regulate air quality and temperature in the tunnel, as well as provide emergency services access. The site sits within very constrained boundaries. We have residential receptors right along the edge of our site and a school right next door. And what that really did was highlight to the site teams that we had to do something differently. We needed to reduce noise, we needed to reduce emissions. And as I said there, the site team has been super proactive in really finding what alternative solutions there could be, which this site really is a combination of a range of different aspects and innovations. So what the site did, as you can see from the slide, all the various different pictures, is they prioritized mains power electricity connection. It is on a 100% renewable energy tariff. As you can see in the bottom corner there, they have one of the 160 fully electric crawler cranes. It can run off batteries for 4 to 6 hours and then can be plugged into mains power through sort of an umbilical cord system. They've also got a range of smaller electric machinery, such as sort of compressors and pumps. And then they're also using biofuels, so hydrogenated vegetable oil or HVO, where there isn't an alternative option. So what they're doing is using those biofuels in the cleanest engine technology that is available. And while it is our first diesel-free site, there are many others that are very close and are really implementing a range of different technologies to meet this ambition. And as I know, pictures always speak louder than words. On the next few slides, what I've got is just a few photographs across phase 1 area, which is that London to Birmingham stretch, of some of the on-ground solutions that we really are aiming to use to really reduce emissions, improve local air quality, and reduce noise, and reduce exposure to both sort of operatives working on our site and communities sort of living nearby. So if we follow on the sort of realm of the electric crawler crane on renewable and electric solutions, we've been using a range of fully electric and fully renewable solutions for a while on the project. And they come in all shapes and forms, but what we've got is renewable energy, so solar panels or wind power powering site security cameras, noise and dust monitors, to sort of site lighting and briefing pods. In the top center there, that's a solar pod, which can be built together with other solar pods to form a mini grid to power a site compound. I already mentioned our fully electric crawler crane, but we've in fact got 3. So we have 1 at Canterbury Road ventilation shaft, and we have 2 at our Old Oak Common station. As I mentioned, they are fully electric crawler cranes, and we've got 2 160 tonners and 1 250 tonner. So they're really, really big machines. Again, powered by batteries, charged on mains power connection, and then they can run off that umbilical cord system. You may have seen in the media, but our contractor up north, BBV, so Balfour BT Vinci, recently deployed a fully electric piling rig to really look at what is the comparison between a fully electric machine like this versus the diesel alternative. And the results have actually been really fantastic. The operators are saying it's a lot more responsive. It's less pressure on the operative working in the cab, so the movement around it, which is really positive to start seeing. So we're hoping that there will be more machines like this at this scale and size that we can start to really use and trial across the project. Some of the other solutions, hydrogen has obviously been a big buzzword for a while now. It's really great that we've got a range of different solutions, from tower lights, so fuel cell tower lights, to using welfare units. We've also been trialing 2 very big hydrogen fuel cell generators, so they are both 250 kilowatts. And they are direct replacements for diesel generators at our Victoria Road crossover box in Ealing. And what the key there is the learnings from these trials will be shared with all of our joint ventures as well as the wider industry, to identify where we can adopt these. What were the challenges, what were the barriers, and how do we get over those to really push these sorts of technologies as construction norms. Not only there's absolutely 0 emissions, they are far quieter, and the only byproduct is deionized water. And I was recently on site and did have some, exactly like any other water you would taste. So it's a really fantastic technology that we're starting to see sort of really increase the uptake across the construction industry. And then it's a case of, well, what do we do? What else can we do? What if there is no mains power electricity? What if hydrogen isn't as accessible as we need it to be? And the 2 photographs on the far left-hand side was an Innovate UK funded project with a company called Oak Tech, where they developed the clean air gas engine. Essentially, the engine runs off biogas rather than diesel. It's been sort of twofold. The first phase, the engine was fitted into a hybrid Advantair welfare cabin, which makes use of solar panels with the clean air gas engine as the backup power source. And then Oaktech have recently been trialing their standalone generator, which again runs off biogas. Imperial College have undertaken the emission testings on the engines, and the results are very, very positive. Maestro Gardos joint venture at Euston Station is currently trialing the standalone generator set. And once we've got a bit more information on the trial, we'll share that with the wider industry as well. We've also been working with Eminox on retrofit solutions to bring older diesel engines in line with sort of the latest, cleanest emission standards. I mentioned the use of biofuels previously as well, and then using sort of battery storage solutions to reduce our diesel consumption, which sort of leads really nicely into what other efficiency solutions are there, which is really, really important within the construction industry, where we don't have diesel-free or diesel alternative solutions yet. What can we do now? And those, I mean, they come in all shapes and forms, from changing methodologies on site to be more efficient, to using different solutions such as retrofit, as I mentioned, or hybrid solutions. We've also been trialing a flywheel technology, which stores up the energy so you can have a much smaller generator. You also don't need your generator running for 8 hours a day. It can now be 5 hours a day. So you're really just reducing your fuel consumption, reducing your impact on surrounding communities. There is a lot of information on these different trials on our HS2 webs page. If you look for the HS2 and air quality web page, you'll see a bit more information on some of these case studies. And as more information on these trials become available, we do put it out into the public space and share it across the industry, that we can all be sort of aligned and making use of that sort of information pack. Which essentially, just to conclude then, as Mark said, it's not, we don't agree, simply say, think it's right, we'll do the trial and we'll stop there. It's how do we make this the new construction norm? How do we roll this out at scale and use the scope and stretch of the HS2 route to do that? And we're working really closely with the Department for Transport as well as other arm-length bodies to really align plans in the diesel-free space, to really make sure that we move forward on this journey as an industry and not in our individual silos. So we're working really closely with Construct Zero to develop an industry-wide diesel elimination map, which, with implementation of innovations like those that I've highlighted already, will aim to mitigate the risk linked to the escalating fuel price, as well as really accelerate the reduction in emissions and meet some of the objectives that we've set out. And there's a lot of work being done in the background, and where we can, we're trying to take immediate action. So we've been working on an anti-idling toolkit, which will be released very soon to the wider industry. And what that looks at is, what can we do with what we've got right now? And simply around education and changing behaviors, we can have a really, really big impact. And we're collaborating with the Supply Chain Sustainability School, our suppliers, our contractors, and academia to really make sure that we can have a useful pack that the industry can use. So it really is a watch this space. There's lots more coming as we sort of make progress on our diesel-free journey and ambitions. What I'm going to do now is hand back to Hannah to detail out some of the work we're doing around creating a green corridor, and hopefully we can touch back on a few of those innovations through the Q&A.
Thank you, Andrea. So, as mentioned by my fantastic colleagues Mark and Andrea, we're doing all we can across the project, using the latest, greenest technology to really look at where we can reduce carbon emissions where possible, but also really helping to support the breakthroughs that we need to make construction cleaner. But as a project, we also take our responsibility to the natural environment very, very seriously, and we're actually committed to a net zero loss of biodiversity. Building the infrastructure that's needed for a project the size and scale of HS2 means that, unfortunately, it is impossible to avoid some damage to the landscape and the countryside. But we are striving as a project to leave an overall positive legacy for nature, wildlife and people, and we really are committed to that. And to do this, we're creating a green corridor, and this is going to run alongside the railway and really help to integrate HS2 into the landscape. But it's also going to create a network of bigger, better connected, climate resilient habitats that everybody is going to be able to enjoy. We're planting millions of trees and shrubs along the route, and as these trees grow, they're also going to play an important role in helping fight against climate change. And they're going to do that through helping to absorb and remove carbon from the atmosphere. So I'm going to touch a bit more in more detail on the green corridor in the next few slides. So as it says there on the slide, we're building the most sustainable high-speed railway in the world. And we are, at this moment in time, the largest environmental project in the UK. We're committed to deliver a railway that respects the natural environment by conserving, replacing or enhancing wildlife habitats where we can. This includes avoiding or reducing any impact on the countryside in the first place if we can help it, with over half of the phase 1 route in a tunnel or a cutting. We're also building a series of green bridges along the route that's really going to help connect habitats so that both people and wildlife are going to be able to cross the line safely. And on phase 1 alone, we're planting 7 million trees and creating green spaces to leave behind 30% more habitat. That's 30% more than there are originally. And that's going to cover an area 23 times the size of Hyde Park, which is absolutely mind-boggling. And it's going to replace any habitats that are affected by the construction of HS2. And all of this is being done while the rest of the HS2 network is still being developed and designed. So this means that it's just going to provide more opportunities to expand the green network and the green corridor further north. And it's also going to help people and communities living along the railway to really reconnect with the natural world. So looking at HS2, it really is such an incredible major opportunity to really accelerate environmental benefits in local areas. So I'm going to move on now and talk about some of the green corridor principles. So, as I said, we take the environmental cost of construction very seriously, which is why we're delivering an unprecedented programme of tree planting and habitat creation alongside the railway. And our vision for the green corridor includes planting 7 million trees and shrubs, and this includes 40 native species specific to each location. We're also creating and enhancing 33 square kilometres of new and existing wildlife habitat. And to put that into everyday context, this equates to the size of 4,600 football pitches. So it really is just absolutely huge, the scale that we're creating. And as I said, it's going to increase around 30% more of what currently exists. And our programme of habitat creation includes creation of species diverse grasslands, ponds, native trees and shrub planting, and all this is going to help support a broad number of species such as newts, reptiles, badgers, birds and bats. And far from being a barrier to wildlife, HS2 is actually going to be crisscrossed by access routes with 140 bridges and underpasses on phase 1 alone. And this is going to include 16 specially designed green bridges covered in planting. So it really is incredible what the green corridor is going to do. And another goal of the green corridor is to minimise and compensate for the environmental impact of HS2. And where we can't avoid an impact, we are creating bigger, better connected habitats. So how are we doing this exactly? Well, if we look at rural areas like this one shown in the image, we're trying to avoid affecting the surrounding environment as much as possible, particularly through the railways and linemen, and making sure that it blends into the landscape. An example of this is over 32 miles or 51 kilometres of the railway between London and the West Midlands is going to be in tunnels, and around 44 miles or 73 kilometres are going to be in cuttings. So this means that we're actually going to lower the railway within the landscape, which is going to reduce its visual impact. And where we can't avoid having some effects, we're working with local communities to really look at ways we can help minimise it. And this is being done through things such as changing the design of the structures we're building to better integrate and suit the landscape that it's going into. And we're doing work in urban areas as well. We're building new stations to serve the new railway in some of our major cities. And these stations are not just seen as construction projects, but as real opportunities to create transformational green infrastructure. And really, it's going to help play a part in regenerating these towns and cities. And here we can see on screen an image of HS2's Interchange Station in Solihull. And this station has actually received a gold award for its sustainable design credentials. So it's been recognised externally for the green infrastructure and the green sustainability that it has. And the stations and the surroundings are also going to include green buildings and a lot of new green spaces. And we're working to really enhance the nearby wildlife areas in and around the stations, including canals, streams and rivers. And through initiatives, we're looking to improve air and water quality and even help cool the urban environment, which is also feeding into that requirement around looking at how we adapt and mitigate for climate change. And we're also working with our supply chain partners to really protect and enhance the local environment. And one of our single biggest landscape and habitat creation projects is actually in the Colne Valley on the edge of the Chiltern Hills. And what we're actually doing here is we're creating 127 hectares, 127 hectares of new chalk grassland, woodland, wood pasture and wetland habitats. And again, to put that into everyday, that's the equivalent of 178 football pitches. So the size and scale is just incredible. And it's also going to deliver a significant ecological gain for that area. And to do this, we're going to be recycling 3 million cubic metres of chalk that's taken from the tunnel excavation. So this is also going to mean it's going to help cut our carbon emissions by working to reduce our road haulage and also the waste treatment that it would require. Almost 65,000 trees and shrubs and nearly 2 miles of new hedgerows are also going to be planted. And people are going to be able to enjoy this new connected green space with 2.7 miles of new footpaths, cycling and horse riding routes. So some really incredible benefits from just this one habitat alone that is being created as part of the project. And as our work to build the railway progresses, so does our work to create new landscape, habitats and woodlands, which you can see on the screen there. So far, we've planted over 700,000 trees and created over 60 new wildlife habitats. And these habitats have included a massive range and been built between Greater London and North Warwickshire. And they include species diverse grassland, ponds, native trees and shrub planting. And all of these support, as I said, species such as newts, reptiles, badgers, birds and bats. And one example of this is the South Covington Woods in Warwickshire, where we've created 7 new ponds, which are already attracting swallows and swifts, and are also home to newts, frogs and insects. There are also refuges and basking banks for reptiles, bat boxes and fruit trees, which as they grow are going to provide potential bat roosting habitat as well. We've also got extensive grassland that's been planted, which is going to really support local wildlife. And we've got alongside 60,000 new trees, which include native species as well, such as oak, hazel, birch, holly and hawthorn. And around 17 hectares of habitat have been created around South Covington. And this has included 6 hectares of broadleaf wood, and it also links the habitats of South Covington Wood and the River Leam corridor. So again, really demonstrating that habitat connectivity. And like most of the sites that HS2 are creating, parts of the new habitat have public rights of way. So it's really going to enable local people to enjoy walking through this colourful new landscape, but also really allowing them to connect and appreciate nature as well. And we're also supporting our neighbours to improve their local environment. At the core of HS2 is our responsibility to local communities. And we're really listening and responding to the needs of those local communities and to the people that live there. And also really demonstrating our commitment to respecting and preserving local features and heritage landmarks. This is being done through funding opportunities through what is known as the Community Environment Fund, also known as CEF. And we also have the CEF Strategic Fund, which focuses on larger projects which can be done across several communities. And these also look to address the strategic rather than just purely local concerns. And the aim, wherever possible, of CEF is to really leave a sustainable legacy behind as part of the project. And just to date, across phase 1 and phase 2A, we have funded 207 projects, which total 12.04 million. And all of these are all helping local communities to improve their local environment. As it says on screen there, we're really creating a resilient green corridor that both nature and people are going to be able to enjoy. So let's just do a bit of a recap. We know inevitably that HS2 is going to leave a footprint on the British countryside. We can't deny that, but we are working to do everything to ensure that that is a positive one. We're going to create a railway that respects the natural environment by conserving, replacing or enhancing wildlife habitats where we can. And we're also looking at avoiding or reducing impact on the countryside in the first place. And we're doing this with over half of phase 1 routes already in a tunnel or a cutting. And we're also creating the green corridor, which is going to run alongside the route. We're going to plant 7 million trees and shrubs and leave behind 30% more wildlife habitats than were there originally. So 30% of them currently exist. We're helping local communities to improve their local environment and get appreciation for nature and access to nature. And we're also committed to achieving no net loss of biodiversity along the route. I think what's really important to note is that, well as being Europe's largest infrastructure project, HS2 is also Europe's largest ecology project. And we are really working as hard as we can to ensure that as a project, we really can leave behind that ecological legacy that we can all be proud of. So that brings us to the end of the presentation element of the webinar, and it's now time to move on to the Q&A section. So I just want to do a bit of a quick reminder about how to post questions. So on the right of your screen, you should see a box, and this is the area where you can post your questions, and you should also be able to see any published responses as well. And just moving on to this slide, we've also included a QR code which links to our carbon webpage to find more about how HS2 is tackling climate change. So please do scan that code. So I'd like to welcome back our speakers to the panel, and we'll start with the first question, which I believe is for Mark. So given the huge scale of HS2's programme, how will you reach net zero construction from 2035?
Thanks, Anna. Yeah, so I think covered this in the presentation, hopefully, but various ways. So it's part of it is about making sure that we're building the right culture within HS2 and our supply chain. So one of the ways that we're doing that is by making carbon reduction a prerequisite for winning work on HS2, a commitment to net zero being a prerequisite for particular contracts. So building it into our procurement processes and making sure that that creates the right incentive for our supply chain. Beyond that, building capability within HS2 so that we understand what's expected and required of us. So, for example, through our carbon literacy learning, we've also made those resources available to our supply chain partners so that they can do the same in their own organisations. And we're looking at how we can and are actively working with the Supply Chain Sustainability School to build capability across the supply chain. But obviously, we're also going to have to invest in innovation, and Andrea showed a lot of the great work that we're doing there. And that's going to be a really critical part of scaling up and establishing the new net zero carbon solutions that we need. But it's also about going together, going as a collective. We're all in the same boat when it comes to net zero. So working in partnership with our supply chain, but also with peer organisations, other client organisations, our sponsor, the Department for Transport, and other government agencies to accelerate the adoption of zero carbon solutions. And we're actively sharing best practice and lessons learned. So we have our Learning Legacy portal, has a number of carbon related papers in there, and actively working with Network Rail and other arm's length bodies to share our learning to sort of increase the uptake of these carbon reduction and carbon management approaches.
Great, thank you, Mark. Really detailing there how much we've got going on within HS2. So I've got another one here, which I think segues nicely into Andrea's area of expertise. So how will HS2's innovation programme help the wider industry to decarbonise construction?
Thanks, Hannah. Sorry, everyone. I was struggling to get myself off mute there. I think I mentioned earlier that we've got a really extensive innovation program on HS2 and a really great team that sits in that department that have some key focus areas around sort of design, how we use energy, sort of workforce innovations, and then the big one is around carbon reduction and how we do that. And some of the key aims that they sort of work to is how do we do more with less and actually reduce impacts in the process rather than sort of just being ideas on pieces of paper, but that we actually take action and realize benefits on the ground. So through some of the sort of demonstrations and use case examples, some of which I went through earlier, we're really starting to build this legacy of knowledge. And Mark mentioned the Learning Legacy Portal, which we have, and some of the other major projects before HS2 have the same. And it's really about not redoing what's been done, but building on what's there and really creating sort of expertise in the supply chain and creating sort of new commercial opportunities within the UK. And by working through all the different levels of supply chain, whether that's contractor, innovators, academia, you name it, it's really about understanding new solutions and de-risking the opportunities to, as I said, truly reduce the emissions. And with the size and scale of the project, we've got this real opportunity to create this lasting change and to ensure that the new construction norm that we create on HS2, that projects after HS2 will just use the cleaner and greener technologies and techniques. And that's truly sort of the opportunity we have with our innovation program to make sure that we, as I said, de-risk the solutions that can then just be adopted as normal practice going forward.
Great, thank you, Andrea. I've got one here now for the entire panel, which I'll throw out to you first, Mark, then Andrea, and then for myself. So a question, it says for the whole panel, what legacy will HS2 leave behind?
Well, ultimately, a high-speed railway network that's a critical part of a net zero carbon transport system. So something that is providing an attractive alternative and a zero carbon alternative to road and air, and providing massive benefits in terms of getting freight from road and air onto rail. But there's also the big legacy benefit from construction. So being a really big part of advancing and accelerating the net zero transition for construction and manufacturing.
I mean, it leads quite nicely if Mark's talking about really that operation and how we get the materials in to, well, what's the legacy for cleaner construction? And I think I answered it a little bit in the last question, but we're changing the face of construction right now. We're changing how construction's always been done. Our contractors are using different methodologies to do things. They're using different technologies like the renewables or the hydrogen or the fully electric to really reduce emissions. So that's really the legacy we leave behind, and we're setting the bar for the construction projects that will come post HS2 and other phases of HS2 as well. And really, really importantly, that as we take these steps now to reduce emissions on our sites, we're really creating sites that are safer places to work for our operatives, and again, truly reducing the environmental impacts on surrounding communities and environments as well, and really minimizing those.
Great. Yeah, absolutely agree with both of you there. For me, in relation to the green corridor and ecology, I mean, inevitably, the construction and delivery of HS2 is going to leave a footprint on the British countryside. We can't deny that. And it's something that we're carefully managing, but also we're looking at where we can improve the environment where we can. And, the green corridor is really going to help integrate HS2 into the landscape. And it's going to include that network of habitats that are going to range from woodlands and meadows to wetlands and ponds. And also the fact that we're replacing any habitats that are affected while also conserving and enhancing some as well. I mean, we're going to leave behind 30% more than what currently exists. And in 2017, for example, we started work on our first wildlife habitats. And that was when we appointed our main works contractor. And as the civil engineering work progresses, so are going to be the opportunities to create habitat and landscape and woodland initiatives. And at a local level, I think it's about the habitats that we're creating, from badger sets to bat houses. So we're also supporting any animals and species that are affected by the construction in HS2. And again, it's about leaving behind bigger and better habitats than what's already there. And we've also got a responsible approach to natural resources with most of the materials that we're excavating for tunnels and cuttings being used as part of our earthworks. So ultimately, the approach is really going to allow us to be the best informed on the impacts of the scheme, but also understand where the necessary mitigations needed to reduce those impacts where possible, but also really looking at where we've got opportunities to leave that bigger, better and natural environment. And for me, it's all about leaving that ecological legacy and something that we can all be proud of, and something that I'm massively proud of in the work that I do on a day-to-day basis. So I should just have a look at some of the questions that have been published in the chat. So Mark, one for you, I think. Have we included supplier carbon footprint in the work that we've been doing at HS2?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. Supplier carbon emissions are 99.9% of our carbon footprint. So what I presented earlier is a whole life carbon assessment. It accounts for all of the emissions, regardless of where they occur in the supply chain, from the process and manufacturing extraction of materials, their transport to site, the installation and construction activities, and then throughout use, including repair, replacement, maintenance, refurbishment, operational water consumption, operational energy consumption, and then also the end of life impact as well.
Fantastic. And then we've got one here. I think I'll address it to you first, Mark, and then Andrew, it might be something that you might want to add to. It says, are the HS2 good practices are reducing carbon in construction being fed into other small scale railway projects such as Network Rail bridge renewals? I think probably you can't really comment from a Network Rail perspective, but probably on the legacy piece that we're doing, and the learning legacy might feed into that quite nicely, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So from a carbon perspective, we're engaging with all of the arm's length bodies under the Department for Transport portfolio. So Network Rail, East West Rail, TfL. We've also spoken with Crossrail, High Speed 1, and we engage with the infrastructure client group. So the likes of Environment Agency, National Grid, the people from the nuclear world. So we're engaging with various client organisations to share our experience of carbon management and net zero. National Highways is another one that we're working very closely with currently, particularly across Network Rail, National Highways and HS2. We all have our own net zero carbon plans. So we're all working together to identify opportunities to collaborate, to accelerate and advance our common objectives. We share learning on a sort of week to week basis and informal settings as well, and through formal forums. And then of course we have our learning legacy portal as well, where we share learning more broadly with whoever's interested in seeing it.
I don't think I have too much to add to that, Hannah. It's exactly the same on sort of all the diesel-free initiatives, and we're working with the Construction Leadership Council on their Construct Zero arm. Neil Waite on our side is chairing that group, and that really is made up of all the arm length bodies from Environment Agency, National Highways, Network Rail, to again really make sure that we're all aligned in what we're trying to do, and can also bring the demonstrators and trials that we've all done to the party and to the table, that we can all learn from sort of other innovations that have been done or other trials that have been done.
Fantastic. Thank you both. Just looking down here now, they've been coming in thick and fast. We've got one to both of you here. What, in your view, is the biggest single carbon challenge facing the construction industry, and how do we address this?
Yeah, I'll go first if I may. So I would say that the really big challenge for net zero is that there's no silver bullet. And what that means is that we need a diverse portfolio of solutions, and we need those solutions at scale. So a lot of the solutions that we need to get to net zero already exist, but they don't exist at scale. And even for HS2, we need them in massive quantities. So to look beyond that as well, we obviously need to ramp up the availability of these solutions, and in some instances make them more cost effective as well. So that for me is the big issue. There's no silver bullet. We need solutions at scale and across a diverse portfolio.
I mean, the only thing to add to that is Mark briefly touched on it there around sort of the economic viability of some of these alternatives and the price of diesel. So the red diesel entitlement, so the tax entitlement for construction to use a cheaper diesel was removed in April this year. And the invasion in Ukraine has also really driven up diesel prices, which is really accelerating that we all need to do something differently, but also making a lot of these other solutions around hydrogen, around fully electric, suddenly more cost effective and more cost viable, which is really good to see. But yes, exactly what Mark said there, these solutions have to be scaled up to be able to be rolled out, not just across HS2, but around other construction sites and projects as well. And then Mark touched on it earlier as well, is around that culture and education to make sure that everybody through the different layers of supply chain take ownership of meeting net zero construction by 2035, that we're all on board, that we're all going towards the same goal. I think that's some of the other hurdles that we're slowly getting over.
Right, thank you both. So just another one now, probably one for yourself, Mark, is are you constructing any renewable energy generators within the project, or does it depend on mains grid renewable tariffs?
So at our stations and our depots, particularly, they will all have on-site renewable energy generation technology. So pretty much all of them have solar panels and utilize ground source heat pumps. So that is dictated through good practice, but also through some of our BREEAM commitments. So we're looking to be BREEAM excellent across our stations and depots, so that's driving great performance. And it's also through some of our carbon reduction objectives as well. So we have a requirement that our supply chain are responding to in terms of making all of our stations, depots zero energy in terms of regulated energy. So yes, they'll have on-site renewable energy generation to meet the energy demand, but what's really important is that way before all of that, they're reducing energy demand and consumption in the first instance. So looking at opportunities for natural ventilation, natural lighting to minimize how much energy we're consuming in the first place, and then specifying highly energy efficient systems, and then looking at the opportunities for on-site renewable energy generation.
Fantastic. And then we've got one here that says, an excellent presentation, thank you. The Green Corridor is great, but what other initiatives are you working on that will benefit the operation and maintenance phase? For example, are you looking into harnessing wind and solar, such as installing solar grids along the railway, hydrogen trains, electric maintenance, plant equipment, durable assets that require no maintenance, etc.? I think probably both of you would be able to highlight that specifically as well from the things that we're talking about, the diesel-free sites, Andrew, which have been a fantastic achievement that we've done recently on HS2.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. We definitely are looking at all the different aspects that feed into operation as well. So it's a really great question. What we plan to do is take the learnings of what we take and build in construction to translate that into operation as well. So as we start to build that information, it does get shared with the wider industry. We do publish it on our websites. We do share it through press releases. As well as the academic reports. So any study that I mentioned, the University of Birmingham or Imperial College London, we do publish those academic reports, that it's not just, believe what we say, but actually see it from those who have written or done the emission testing and the like. In terms of, operation, I think Mark can probably talk a little bit more. I think there are some questions around how we plan to power the trains. But then exactly like you said, they're looking at maintenance, looking at electric options towards what hydrogen opportunities there might be. And then again, how do we extend renewable energy into that sort of operation space as well? So I don't have a clear answer for you yet. I think it was Ross on the call. But as we sort of develop those solutions in construction, we'll translate them into operation.
Fantastic. Thank you. So I think we're just about out of time. We're smack bang on 1 o'clock. Apologies that we haven't been able to get through everything, but just a reminder that if you do have any questions that are not answered, you can direct them to our help desk if you want to, and they will send them across to the correct person. And the details there are on screen now, so please feel free to do that. I'd just also like to finish with the last comment that's been published. An excellent presentation, thanks to all, and that I've appreciated the honesty on the impact in information and how committed HS2 and their supply chain are to continue to innovate and add value to the environment. So I think that's a really great one to finish on. And just a reminder that we can't share the slides for this webinar, but it will be going up onto our YouTube page, so you can go in and access it there and watch it again at your leisure. So I'd just like to say thank you to our panelists, thank you to Mark and Andrea, and also please do fill in the event survey, because we really do want to hear your thoughts and how we can take forward new webinars and improve as well. So thank you much everybody for joining us, and have a great rest of the afternoon.